The officer hesitates but doesn't back down. There was a report earlier about suspicious activity involving a car like this, he says, though the words sound shaky. The young man's grip tightens on the phone, and for the first time, he looks directly at the officer. "I think you've got the wrong person," he says quietly. The officer's radio crackles to life, and a voice on the other end asks for an update. He pauses, fingers twitching near his side, and for a brief moment, it feels like everything could tip one way or the other. The captain doesn't move, but his presence alone seems to pull the situation into sharper focus. Whatever happens next feels like it could change everything. The officer's hand lingers near his belt, but he doesn't make a move. The radio crackles again, louder this time, and the captain finally speaks. "Answer it," he says, his tone leaving no room for argument. The officer hesitates, then reluctantly lifts the radio to his mouth. "Yeah, I've got it under control," he says, glancing at the young man. But the voice on the other end cuts him off. "Stand down." The captain's son matches the description, but it's been confirmed he wasn't involved. False report. The officer freezes, his grip tightening on the radio. His eyes meet the captain's, and for the first time, there's uncertainty. Slowly, he steps back from the car, but the tension still lingers. The captain watches him carefully, but just as it seems everything is about to ease, the young man speaks up. "You didn't stop me because of a report, did you?" His voice is steady, but there's something firm beneath it. The officer shifts uncomfortably, glancing at the captain, but there's no answer to give. The captain steps forward, standing next to his son. "We'll be going now," he says quietly. As they pull away, the officer watches them disappear into the night, left standing alone with the weight of his own actions. As the captain and his son drive in silence, the city lights blur past the window. The weight of what just happened lingers between them, but neither speaks right away. Finally, the young man breaks the quiet. "I handled it," he says softly, glancing over. The captain nods, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I know," he replies, his voice calm but proud. The night feels quieter now, the tension left behind at the side of the road. For the young man, it's more than just another traffic stop. It's a reminder of how quickly things can shift and the importance of staying composed. For the captain, it's a sign that his son is ready to face those moments on his own. As they pull into their driveway, the captain pauses before turning off the car. "You did good tonight," he says simply. His son smiles faintly. Sometimes the quietest victories mean the most. You're not going to believe what happens in this story. Imagine this. A routine traffic stop takes a wild turn when a cop, with a history of questionable behavior, pulls over a young man. But here's the twist. That young man is the son of the city's black police captain. At first, everything seems typical, but the situation quickly escalates in a way no one could have expected. Tensions rise as the officer's tone shifts, and the young man's calm demeanor only seems to fuel the cop's frustration. Little does the officer know, the captain is just one phone call away, and the truth about who he's dealing with is about to come out. But when the captain arrives, the real shock isn't what happens to the cop, it's what the captain's son does next. You'll want to stay tuned because this is one ending you won't see coming. As the captain's car pulls up behind the patrol vehicle, the flashing lights paint a tense scene. The young man sits quietly in his driver's seat, gripping the wheel while the officer stands firm just outside his window, unaware of who he's really dealing with. The officer's voice sharpens as he questions the young man, pressing for details that feel unnecessary. The captain steps out, his uniform crisp, and his eyes locked on the situation unfolding before him. His son catches his gaze in the rearview mirror, but doesn't say a word. There's a weight in the air, a mix of frustration and something unspoken between them. The officer notices the captain approaching, but by the time he realizes who it is, the damage might already be done. What led to this moment isn't just about one traffic stop. It's about assumptions, power, and the way one interaction can reveal deeper truths. The officer's eyes flicker with confusion as the captain approaches, his badge reflecting in the glow of the patrol lights. "Evening, officer," the captain says, his voice calm but carrying a weight that's hard to ignore. The officer hesitates for a moment before stiffening. "This your son?" he asks, his tone not quite hiding the defensiveness creeping in. The captain doesn't answer right away. Instead, he looks at his son, who hasn't moved an inch, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't aware there was an issue tonight," the captain finally replies, keeping his tone steady. The officer shifts uncomfortably, suddenly second-guessing the situation. He glances back at the young man, realizing just how composed he's been this whole time. The tension thickens as the officer stumbles over his words, trying to explain why he initiated the stop. But every reason feels weaker than the last, and the weight of the captain's silence makes it harder to continue. Meanwhile, the captain's son keeps his eyes forward, letting the moment play out. The dynamic between them says more than words ever could. The silence stretches, thick enough to feel like a weight pressing down on the scene. The officer clears his throat, trying to regain control. "Routine stop," he mutters, shifting on his feet. But the captain doesn't move. His eyes stay fixed on the officer, studying him carefully, as if waiting for something more. The young man finally glances over at his father, just for a second, but the look says enough. It's not frustration, it's something deeper, something harder to define. The captain notices, but doesn't acknowledge it. His focus remains on the officer, who's now fumbling with his notepad, pretending to double-check something that no longer matters. Another patrol car slows as it drives by, but it doesn't stop. The officer seems to notice, standing up a little straighter as if trying to signal that he's got everything under control. But everyone knows that's not the case. The captain's presence alone shifts the power in ways the officer hadn't expected. Still, no one speaks, and the longer it drags on, the clearer it becomes something is about to break. Just as the tension seems unbearable, the young man's phone buzzes on the passenger seat. The sound is small, but in the heavy quiet, it feels louder than it should. The officer's eyes flick to the phone, his brow furrowing. "I'm going to need to see that," he says, his voice suddenly regaining authority. The captain's gaze sharpens, but his son reaches for the phone without hesitation. Before the young man can unlock it, the officer steps closer to the window, his hand instinctively drifting toward his belt. The captain takes a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "Is there a reason you need to see my son's phone, officer?" The question hangs in the air, calm but cutting.